dismissing America as a failed social experiment.
How do we tell this story in a way that builds the kind of emotional momentum that colorblind ideology built?
So many young brothers and sisters of the younger generation find themselves so far removed from the best of their past.
What are we going to make out of the nothing we've been given? How do you envision possibility? Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Tricia Rose, and I'm here, virtually, sitting with my dear friend and colleague, Cornel West, and we are now on The Tightrope. The Tightrope is a new podcast with unfiltered dialogue with each other and with you on a range of issues, from music and literature to film, politics, activism, feminism, humor, racism, the Black radical tradition, and much, much more. But today, we're focusing in on the pain that everyone is feeling in this current moment, in particular, Black pain. But we want to think about it in the context of the tremendous legacy of African American creativity and music. It is African American Music Appreciation Month, and I say that with a little bit of irritation because I can't imagine a month beginning to capture the impact of African American creativity on American music. But we're also going to hone in specifically on Prince. It was his birthday just a few days ago, and his artistic genius, in particular the song Purple Rain. But we're trying to connect these musical traditions to the current political moment. Why is African American music so important, and what role does it play in social activism? There's so much to say about this, but off the top of my head, the most important three things are the way that it imagines alternative futures and the beauty of imagining a future better than where you are, the ways it fortifies voices of protest and codifies it in a way that allows us all to participate, and the healing power of African American music by channeling the love ethic in rhythm. Cornel and I are going to use this musical legacy to consider Purple Rain and the resilience and excellence that brought it into being. But right now we're going to pick up with Cornel's response to a question about the importance of the Black musical tradition and its relationship to historical trauma and suffering.
The beautiful thing is how the Black musical tradition has been able to transfigure that suffering into what we were listening to, Love Supreme, what the Isley Brothers would call the caravan of love. That is what the Black freedom movement has been all about. That's what the Black musical tradition that sits at the very center of the Black freedom movement is all about. And I've always believed, Sister Tricia, and this goes back to your classic Black Noise back in the early 90s. You were the first one to write about hip hop, which is the most recent manifestation of the great Black musical tradition. But what it's been about for the most part is to look unflinchingly at all of the hurt and the pain, and yet still dish out the compassion and creativity, the style and smile. And that's the great gift to America, because I must say that, if Black folk had created a Black version of the Ku Klux Klan in the face of 400 years of white terrorism, there'd been a civil war every generation in America.
Yes, that is the truth. But this, what you're speaking to here, this collective pain and trauma and the ability to confront it, to not run from it. And and of course, as you said, to find a creative way through and a love ethic at the same time. But that not running from it, right? I mean, you've talked a lot about this in terms of the blues. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that now, because it's a new moment. It seems that it's much easier to run from pain at the same time as things are so much more visible, right? We have more distractions, more contexts in which it seems easy to be distracted, but also the repetition of the violence that we're seeing at the hands of Black people. It just seems unprecedented in the level of creating new wounds.
No, that's so true. I mean, part of it is that we know hope itself is as much a verb as a virtue, and which is to say, to be in motion and feel as if you're making some kind of progress. Whereas it seems that when things get bottled up, and that's what we saw with Brother George Floyd, that to have that kind of public lynching and people feel as if there's no hope, feel as if we really made no significant progress over all of these years, that the white supremacy still persists in such a way that it's hard to conceive of it ever being overcome. Right. And once you reach that point of being so contained and circumscribed, that people begin to think, lo and behold, all I got left is this indignation. All I've got left is this rage, this anger. And thank God, again, the musicians come along and say there's always a possibility of a creative breakthrough, no matter how overwhelming the catastrophe could be. And that's blues music. That's the Ralph Ellison that you know about and have written about with such profound insight. Ralph Ellison says the blues is a personal narrative of an individual catastrophe lyrically expressed. And anytime you lyrically express a catastrophe, the catastrophe does not have the last word.
Yes.
The music does. The lyrics do. And when the words touch other souls who themselves are hopeless, but recognizing, ooh, I can stay in motion. This music can sustain me. It can heal me. It can equip me. Most importantly, it can fortify me. And once you get oppressed folk fortified, oh, Lord, that's like Sly Stone's stand. You've been sitting much too long. There's a permanent crease in your right and wrong. Once folks start standing, Brother Martin say, anytime oppressed folks straighten their backs, they're going somewhere, because folk can't ride your back unless it's bent. So you take a stand and then recognize that you're on the move. Lo and behold, you're going to have folk in the streets, but not just in the streets, but at home feeling differently in the midst of overwhelming catastrophe, overwhelming calamity, monstrosity. That's what white supremacy really has provided. It generates catastrophe, calamity, monstrosity, and atrocity. But in the face of all of that, here comes the love supreme. Here comes Curtis Mayfield, keep on keeping on. Here comes Mary Lou Williams on the piano with that flow. It could be her mass as a Catholic Christian. It could be in her secular mode with so much bebop to put a smile on Charlie Parker's face.
So tell me, do you think, Cornel, given that tradition and the power of it, that this moment will generate some new sound? I mean, I think about, the footage of, the police officer's knee on George Floyd's throat, and just the casual nature of it, the hand in his pocket, the fact that he didn't shield his face at all, the fact that he stayed there, and no matter all the people screaming, let him breathe, let him up, or he's handcuffed on the ground, basically calling out for his mama, like he's literally taking his potentially last breath. And, of course, there's been monstrosity and trauma and violence against Black people from the beginning. But I'm wondering if this can be a catalyst for a new sound, for a new way to extend and elaborate on the tradition based on where we are now. And, I guess I'm hoping so, because I feel as though we need something new in this moment.
No, I hear you. That's a powerful question, though, Sister Tricia. That's a very profound query. And it's always hard to say. See, it depends on the discipline, vision, and the quality of the musicians themselves. I mean, part of the contemporary spiritual war against young folk, and especially young Black folk, is to get them to consent to a capitalist economy that's shot through with wealth inequality, to get them to consent to a militarized nation state that will contain them or incarcerate them if they step out of line, but also to get them to consent to a commodified culture so that they're distracted into things that are superficial, status and spectacle. And so much of the Black musical tradition in the last few decades has really not been able to achieve the high levels that we associate with the major touchstones. And of course, we got Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Carmen McRae and Billie Holiday, or you got Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker. Then you got Luther Vandross and Aretha and Mahalia. I mean, we got the highest levels of excellence in contemporary music. That's the backdrop for the young musicians these days. But given those three pillars that I talked about, the way in which capitalism operates, the way in which the militarized state operates, the way in which the culture is dumbed down, that it's going to be interesting to see what kind of responses that we actually get musically. Now, I do believe the Black musical tradition still has great creativity, but I also believe that like any other site in America these days, everybody's up for sale, everything is up for sale, and people are much more willing to do something just in order to get by and make money, rather than to dig deep inside of their pain and make some powerful expressions that might have little to do with just trying to get over.
Right. I think I want to add to your powerful list of capitalism, militarism, and the cultural sort of dumbing down to the, erasure of the traditions of education about Black music. Because one of the ways that the culture is dumbed down is by us learning about Black music through the record industry. All right, the record industry is the voice for the platform for this generation of artists across all genres, and whether it's streaming or any other venue. What we don't have are the kind of apprenticeship institutions, the local contexts where musicians can develop new sounds, create new collaborations on the ground, right? I mean, this is part of the way capitalism has and neoliberalism has, destroyed, local urban cultural spaces for people of color to create. So what goes in its place are these institutions that see things like Black History and Black Music Month, right? Which, again, it is African American History Month, Music Month, and that's fine. But that's a marketing agenda, right? This every month should be African American Music Month. That should be in our curriculum. I mean, when I think about how little we know about our own cultural traditions, it's not surprising that there'd be such an influence around superficiality and status and trying to buy in. So, that worries me a lot in terms of hoping that this next genre that comes out of this, George Floyd crisis, it can't just be about recalling the past. It has to be about bringing the past in through the present. And so I'm hoping that we can find a way to encourage young people to turn away from that and turn toward the tradition in the ways that you're helping us see.
That is so very, very true. I was just talking with Brother Bootsy, and we're going to get Bootsy on the show. He's got an album coming out called The Power of the One. We were working on the song for that album. And when you think of his history, not just with the Funkadelics in Parliament, but at 19 years old, playing for James Brown, writing powerful songs, Soul Power, Talking Loud and Saying Nothing, Super Bad 1, Super Bad 2. That's when James Brown even invokes, play your horn like Train. Hit it, Bootsy. Come on, Jabu. Come on, Clyde. All of the great artists who were playing with the band. That's precisely that space that you were talking about, that interaction you were talking about, that creativity that you were talking about, that then provides such rich content to sustain the wounded souls and the scarred hearts, or really the hearts cracked open. Let's just be honest about it. We're talking about heartache and heartbreak to be Black in America, let alone to have to come to terms with just public lynching right now. And it's very important to point out, I think, that this Black musical tradition that we're talking about has always had a tremendous impact on a whole host of vanilla brothers and sisters, a whole impact on brown, on red, on yellow, every color, because it hits at that deep human level. And it's a way of acknowledging our common humanity, not in a trite way, but in the sense that all of us have the wounds, all of us have the scars in different forms, but all of us have it.
This is true. before we turn to the music in greater depth, I wonder if you could share a little bit about, why you think this moment has been such a catalyst. I've been, on the one hand, in a certain way, sort of secretly relieved that there's so much of a tipping point that's apparently going on. You have institutions of higher education, you have corporations, making explicit statements. You have, Ben and Jerry talking about white supremacy ice cream, which I'm clearly going to be buying quite a bit of. Anytime, I'm about to eat ice cream, lactose intolerance be damned. But this, I didn't expect, this level of, extreme sort of buy-in, and like, what is the tipping point now? Is it that we're under the era of Trump and people are just fed up all the way through? Is it COVID? Is it, a number of African Americans and Black people in general of all, nationalities being just gunned down? I'm on the one hand, I'm excited about the possibility, but on the other hand, I'm like, how many Black people had to die before this seemed like a tipping point? How come when I mentioned Trayvon Martin to, students and administrators and other people in my life about, why this was a murder? Well, let's wait and see what the courts say. It's like, there's really nothing for the courts to say. We know Trayvon was gunned down for no good reason. But in any event, I guess I'm just wondering, do you have a take on why we are at this moment? Because if for some reason we need to push this thing over the edge, I want to know where to leverage that, so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think that anytime there's a catalyst for this kind of social motion and momentum, and we'll see whether it can become a social movement over time, that there's a mystery, just as there's an unpredictability. Nobody knew when Sister Rosa sat down in order to stand up for justice in Jim Crow, Alabama, that would be the catalyst. That there'd been other examples of great courage, and they did not constitute the same kind of catalyst. It's just hard to say, though. I think, but the factors that you talked about are very real. One is the escalating, explicit fascism of the gangster in the White House. There's no doubt about that. And the boldness of it, the brazenness of him, his face, his people, and so forth. Then there is the collapse of neoliberal leadership in the Democratic Party that has been unable to generate a vision, an analysis, enough energy and enthusiasm. We know that Brother Bernie generated tremendous enthusiasm and excitement as a progressive neo-populist. But then once the neoliberal unity came and crushed him, crushed us, because I was a part of that, then it was clear that so many of not just the young people, but the people who are deeply concerned about the suffering and reached the conclusion that lo and behold, we have no credible options. The system itself seems to be unable to reform itself. So that if you had an option like over against the fascism of a Trump, then you would have less on the street because people would feel as if the system was responding to them in such a way that their deeper needs and aspirations were being addressed. But it's just hard to make that case when you look at neoliberal leadership. That's a Biden or a Clinton or a Pelosi or Obama, who whatever neoliberal we're talking about in whatever color. They have pretty language and they act like, and they want to act as if they're so progressive. But when it comes to really dealing with, let's send these police to jail. We're not talking about no investigation that takes another 9 months. We're not talking about another national conversation on race that's going to come and go. You know what I mean? And you feel that kind of spirit in the street, very much so.
But there's even one more layer of this, though, Cornel, that I think is worth pushing people on, which is, as much as this feels like such a violent, a clear case and a tipping point, it is, in a sense, an uncontroversial situation. That is to say, who's going to be against
wanting someone to go to jail for killing somebody in broad daylight. But
Right.
when the changes that need to be made that are behind that kind of policing, who's going to stand up for that? Because what the police do when they're not putting their knees on the necks of people is protect capital, protect middle-class white communities, protect, sustain segregation, right? The prison industrial complex is violent in ways that is not visible in the street all the time.
Absolutely.
And the changes that would need to be made, that people say they want to be all Black Lives Matter, they want to end white supremacy. Well, that would mean to dramatically change our public school system. That would mean we'd have to dramatically address the wealth inequality that is the result of hundreds of years of destroying the economic possibility, policy after policy, after industry, gutting any kind of social safety nets that African Americans could come up with for themselves. So, and we could go on and on, but, do you think that there's going to be a will, to move beyond just the cases of extreme police violence into the broader, deep effects of systemic racism? I mean, that's the tipping point, I'm hoping to see, but, I don't know, I almost feel like the cops, are paying the price for something much, much bigger than they are.
Oh, you are 120% right about that. And the real challenge will be whether our brothers and sisters of all colors in the street are able to make the connection between the lack of accountability of police engaging in murder, assassination of fellow citizens on the one hand, but also the lack of accountability of Wall Street criminals engaging in insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activity, predatory lending. Mm-hmm. Are we going to put the same kind of pressure on them to be accountable? How many Wall Street executives went to jail? 0. How many police go to jail? 0. And then it gets deeper than that in terms of the militarism that Brother Martin Luther King Jr. would talk about over and over again. If you're dropping 563 drones on people and you're killing thousands of innocent people and hundreds of children, those are crimes too. Well, then you got to end up in the White House. Then you got to end up in the Pentagon. You got to go to the State Department. If we're really concerned about rule of law and accountability across the board, then the issue of the rule of big money and Wall Street greed, the issue of the rule of militaristic policies, and the unbelievable killings and murders that take place outside of the United States. There's an intimate connection between the militarism of U.S. policy around the world and the militarism of the police vis-a-vis poor people, working people, especially Black people. But it includes brown. And of course, we must acknowledge you got a whole host of white brothers and sisters who are killed by the police every day.
Yeah.
And very few of them are well-to-do. Very few of them are tied to the power elites. They are poor and working people too,
Right. And, it is very important to connect race to class. Race is its own independent variable, but it intersects with, a deep kind of class oppression that the police are responsible for controlling, right? It's, trying to incarcerate, an economic crisis rather than grappling with it. And there's always been, radical and both, vocal whites. I mean, I thought I might explain, it occurred to me that this white supremacy ice cream, people might think I'm joking, but Ben and Jerry's really did post a statement that was very powerful. And so, it looks like they're going to have an end white supremacy ice cream. I certainly hope so. And I'm going to actually eat that ice cream when I'm playing this Black music. I'm gonna eat that when we're playing this Black music we need to tear back to. So tell me what you think is, talk about a genius just for us a little bit. One of the biggest geniuses of Black music. I know you have had some deep thoughts and experiences with Prince in particular. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what those stories are, what Purple Rain means to you, and just, help lift us out of this situation a little bit.
Well, I tell you, every time I just say the word Prince, I have to pause. Some of the wonderful high moments of my life was with that brother there in Paisley Park and Montreux and the jazz festivals. We used to travel the world together. Long conversations. He's a Jehovah's Witness. We'd have deep discussions about the Bible, the relationship between the Bible and revolution, a relationship between biblical texts and fundamental transformation. I never did see him sleep. I don't think he suffered from insomnia. I just never saw the brother sleep, even on the plane all night. He's always writing. He was always inquiring. The level of energy and creativity was just unbelievable. But he knew, as Ralph Waldo Emerson reminds us, that every genius is a highly indebted person. And he knew his debts to James Brown, his debts to Little Richard, his debts to a whole host of folk who came before him. He was grounded in precisely this great Black musical tradition. When we went to Montreux, we played all jazz. We played all jazz. A lot of people don't know that jazz side of Prince. It was just unbelievable. It really was. And as you know, he refused to have his music sampled because he had a very critical disposition toward the dominant tendencies in hip hop of his day. He appreciated hip hop genius, but he just thought there was too much hedonism, narcissism, too much posing and posturing and so forth. But when we asked him to be on our album, the third album, Never Forget, he did, and we made that song together on that album. And that is one of the real pearls in my own past and memory, the fact that he would be open in that way. And you think now, I mean, he would be 62 years old this month, June. That he wrote Purple Rain, 1984. He got that phrase from a song called Ventura Highway by America. The song was written by a brother named Brunel, Dewey Brunel, 1972. You remember that group America that wrote that song, A Horse with No Name?
Yes, yep. Yep.
So he got that phrase, Purple Rain, from that song, Ventura Highway. He had actually done a long version of Purple Rain with no lyrics, sent it to Sister Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac. And she said she was so overwhelmed by the 10 minutes of instrumental music that she couldn't come up with any lyrics. And so she sent it back to Prince. And she's very honest about this. And we know she's done some wonderful songs. She and Prince worked together on a song in 1983 called Stand Back. Prince was playing the piano, the synthesizers for her. So she sent it back. And so Prince then went back into the studio and then had it rewritten with himself and the Revolution, his band. And you said, well, Prince, what does Purple Rain really mean? He said, Purple Rain is the blood in the sky, and the red and the blue produce purple. And so that purple rain is rooted in the blood, sweat, tears. But you're looking up. It's visionary. It is, in some sense, grounded in the most painful situations. But it's visionary because it's looking up, is what so many literary critics said of Dante, that he was earthy, grotesque, but also visionary. And it's almost like the blues. It's rooted in the most visceral responses to the most vicious kinds of treatment, in which is blood stained, and yet it's still looking up, like being in a dehumanized gutter, but one has one's eyes always headed, looking toward the sky, like Earth, Wind, and Fire. Keep your head to the sky, no matter what's coming at you. So Purple Rain itself becomes a kind of iconic song, iconic sound. He actually, too, Sister Tricia, you might remember, he says he wrote it first in the vein of a country song.
Yes, yeah, I read that. Yeah, I didn't
remember
know
that. I mean, yeah, it's fascinating. That's part of his genius, you see. And this is something that all of us must recognize. If you really going to be rooted in your particularity, then you're going to have a flexibility and a universality. You're going to have an open-mindedness to to a variety of different peoples and cultures and communities. And you're going to have to always be wrestling with what it means to be human in your own skin. Don't try to satisfy somebody else. You got to dig inside of your own humanity. That has to do with your particularity. And that's Prince. That's Prince across the board. Now, Purple Rain was never number one. You know, it was only number two. It was never number one. But the album itself stayed on for 24 weeks in a row. 24 weeks, number one in a row. 1984, sold over 25 million. Went record copies and 13 platinum. I mean, this kind of stuff, Questlove and them know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
No, because you have to have those great caretakers of the tradition. Yeah. We got the serious intellectual analysts of it, like yourself and Questlove and others. And then you got those of us who really are just trying to kind of be inspired by it with some facts, but really don't understand it the way you do, the way Questlove.
No, you don't. You're gonna have to count me over there with you, Cornel. I don't want to get caught up in that. No. I don't. You know, it's a big difference. People who can really drill down into those discrete moments. It's very powerful. But you know, I'm thinking, you know, with a couple things you're saying here, I just want to lift up for a moment, and that has to do with, you know, the indebtedness that you referred to, and also the freedom and the capacity for, you know, Black geniuses to feel a sense of boundarylessness about what they do.
Ooh, that's a wonderful word. That's a wonderful word.
Thank you. With their creativity, with their sound. I mean, look, there's no reason that we should be segregating genres, right, along the lines of the spatial segregation that the country has constantly been invested in producing, because we know that all the music is interconnected, particularly in the South, right? For a very long time. So for Prince to think of a country track is really not to cross boundaries, because he was already boundaryless. But the other thing he was boundaryless about, which I think doesn't get spoken enough about Prince, is his gender fluidity, right? He was very comfortable in an era, you know with the 80s, you know, as well as I do.
Yeah.
This, you know, although there were moments of, what we might consider today to be, you know, gender fluidity and the non-binary performance, you know, people embodying masculinity and femininity, no matter what their biological basis might be. And Prince was just a master at it. It was a neither nor, it was a both and he was just able to elevate above the binaries and the boundaries and the questions of who belongs where on the ground. And I think that approach showed up in many aspects of what he did. Now that doesn't mean
so true. That's so true. I remember that. I know you were born in Harlem and raised in the Bronx. And I was living there right on the edge of Harlem at Columbia and Union Theological Seminary in 1979. When I first heard, "I want to be your lover," I said, "Who is this little brother? Let me go check him out." So he had a concert down in the Village. I go down to see this brother. He shows up with his jock strap. The only thing he wearing is his jock strap with all this makeup on. And I said, like, "Ooh, Lord, he's stretching me." Now, we had already been exposed to this with Jerry, with Brother Gary, you mean, in Funkadelic. Genius George Clinton and the musicians there. You remember he used to show up in a diaper.
Diaper, when he's on his way into the mothership,
And I saw him with his diaper in 1971 at BU at Boston University when I was in college, and he was stretching me too. I said, "Oh, Lord have mercy. These brothers just being themselves." And I said, "Whoo." And so it just hit me that the ways in which our bodies are fashioned, the ways in which our bodies are presented are integral to the way in which our sounds are both produced and received, because your whole body is always already in it when you are giving everything that you are and everything that you want others to receive. I mean, it's like Coltrane. You remember Coltrane was blowing in November 1966 at Temple University. And he got so intense that he threw his horn down on the ground, started beating his chest. And Rashid said, what's going on, man? He said, I'm trying to connect with the people and the horn's getting in the way. And so it's this sense of sometimes your clothes get in the way. Sometimes you just want to be all that you are, and all that we all are in a certain sense is androgynous. There's no doubt about that. And so you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid of white supremacy. Can't be afraid of imperialism. Can't be afraid of empire. Can't be afraid of homophobia. Can't be afraid of male supremacy. But you can't be afraid of the androgynous elements that shot through all of us.
Right. No, that
was one of the things that I carried away, because I went by myself and I left by myself, and I said, "Ooh, I got to take this in. This little brother Prince coming out of Minneapolis." And of course, a lot of times you want to put it on the region. Minneapolis had always been crossing. Remember, that was the one site for interracial marriage. That was the one place where blacks and whites could marry and walk free without getting beat up. Ebony Magazine used to have a little special on them every year of people who are marrying across lines. The place to go is Minneapolis. And so you associated Minneapolis with a certain kind of vibe,
Right. Yeah, definitely. And, I think that shows up in all the bands that he ushered in and brought through in Minneapolis, The Time and, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Mint Condition. But there's only one thing I want to say, as a feminist, I got to say that when it comes to gender bending, men have a lot more freedom. Ultimately, the masculine body, right, it has more freedom to move across spaces, than.
That's true.
And so you're right. We want to make sure we don't limit anybody for sure, but there are constraints that are operative, right? Something about, female bodies controlling the terms of masculinity that tend to be pretty upsetting. So anyway, just had to, you had to.
But it's interesting. I used to go see Sister Grace. I used to go see Sister Grace Jones. And she was doing her bending too.
Yeah, that's true. She was bending. That's true. But she was never celebrated the way Prince was celebrated.
Oh, no.
Right? But some of that could be just his genius in general, too.
That's true. And she was a great talent, but she was not at that level of a Prince. But I just appreciated her bending in that way. And of course, she had ties to Caribbean, coming out of the Caribbean, the Black rich Caribbean tradition, as well as mainstream white rock, black rock, and all the different elements of the music of her day.
Right. No, definitely. So we're getting, as I expected, we could just keep talking all day. It's such a joy to hear you and to be in conversation.
It's a joy to be in dialogue with you in these grim days. I'm telling you, we need each other. We need to share the joys and insights more than any other time.
This is so true, because, there's not a lot to be happy about right now in this public. But we do have people who have signed on to be in conversation with us in our Q&A section, which we are now approaching. And so I wanted to transition us to open up for some questions from our live virtual audience and remind everybody that you should post your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, but not the chat box, because I will not be looking at the chat box. So I have some questions here. There's so many interesting comments and questions. I think I'm going to start with this question here. Let's see. I think what about, we have good afternoon. I think this is directed primarily at you, Cornel. I would like to inquire about your viewpoint on some officers choosing to show their support by kneeling during protests. Do you view it as a PR stunt or as a way to truly reach out to the community?
Oh, no, I think it's a beautiful thing. Anytime you have an individual expression of sensitivity, then that's a beautiful thing. I mean, we have to realize that. I mean, when you see a public lynching and you feel as if it's wrong and inhumane, you don't deserve a moral prize if you respond in a serious way. But it's just an acknowledgement that even those who are part of the repressive apparatus of the nation state are still human beings, and they have their own sensitivities to something that gross, something that raw, something that barbaric and atrocious. And so for me, that's fine. It's an individual witness. But we have to just keep in mind that we got to keep track of individual witness, but we also have to keep track of structures and institutions and the roles that individuals play who find themselves in police uniforms.
Right.
And what particular function that they're actually playing. So we will never lose sight of their humanity. But so much is really put on them so that the issues of poverty, dilapidated housing, decrepit school systems, not enough jobs with a living wage. The point that you were making with such great insight, the invisible forces behind the police, big money, Wall Street domination, militarism here and around the world, they are rendered oftentimes invisible by looking solely at the police. But the police must be accountable individually, must be accountable institutionally. But in the end, it's not going to be about the police. We're talking about the kind of legalized looting that Wall Street greed engages in. Legalized murder that the military engages in when it kills innocent people. Now, combatant's a different situation in war, because I do believe that there's such a thing as just war. I would have fought a war against Hitler. I would have fought a war against apartheid. I would have fought a war against a whole host of the tyrannical orders. But at the same time, when you bring it back home, you say, oh, we got some tyrants here too.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So I'm gonna take this next question quickly, and then it's a good question about how we stay inspired. But before we get that, I wanted to answer his question from an anonymous person saying, how can we utilize technology to create impact and effective change? And I just wanted to just pipe in on this because, you know, I think this is one of the big generational, not divides, but perspective differences between those of us who came of age before the computer and those of us who came of age after the computer. I think definitely you and I are pre-computer. You know, I think what we need to really remember is that this isn't a moment that technology first comes into being. And therefore, we should understand all of the technologies that came before as creating impact and affecting change. Because, you know, we always think the new technology is the beginning of technology, but that's not really the case. And what that continuity helps us see is that it really has to do with what we think about what we're doing, not what tools we have in front of us. Every single right?
I think maybe you should say that slowly one more time.
Okay, all right.
So I can take it in, let alone everybody else.
It's not the technology itself, it's what our thinking is that drives our use of the technology that matters.
Yes.
So, you know, it's important to remember that you can use the telephone any number of ways. You can use Twitter any number of ways. You can use the internet any number of ways. You can use the printing press any number of ways. You can use the recording devices that allow us to record music for the last 100 years in any number of ways. So the question is less about how to utilize the technology and more about how to develop a vision about what our goals are and what our hopes are and what we're striving for. And then we figure out how to utilize the technology in that way toward those ends. So the technology is not an answer. If you remember, many people thought, oh, we're going to get body cameras and that's going to stop the police. Man, them po-po don't care nothing about no body cameras. I mean, how many body cameras have we seen, right? Document materials, and then the story comes out, well, you know, he felt threatened or whatever it, you know, may be. So it isn't going to be the technology. It's going to be about a justice-based movement to use whatever technologies we have at our fingertips.
Ooh, that's so true.
Can be used in the opposite direction as well, of course.
And let us not forget Brother Ramsey Orta, who used his technology to record the public lynching of our dear brother Eric Gardner.
Yeah.
The policeman who killed Eric Gardner, free, sipping tea, and Ramsey went to jail.
All right, we got our time for a couple more questions here. What do we think the responsibility of musicians who are not African American have when they're playing and participating in Black American music? Should we all know Black American music history, ancestors, and the realities they live? But do white or Anglo-Americans or any citizens of the world have extra responsibilities if they participate in Black American music?
Did you want to take that one, or should I grab it?
No,
What do
you go
think?
on ahead, start that one off. That
Oh,
sounds like
okay,
something.
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, see, I would start with what Ludwig Beethoven said when he said the role of the musician is to look at the world unflinchingly in all of its ugliness and misery, and still have a love of beauty so that you speak from the depths of your own soul. That's the calling of any great artist and any great musician. And in contemporary times, it's nearly impossible for any serious musician to look at the world in all of its misery and not include the vast majority in the world, peoples of color all around the world, indigenous peoples, Black peoples, brown peoples, working peoples, poor peoples. And then at the same time, though, you have to have your own voice, your own signature. You got to make it your own. And that has to do with the mastery of your craft and your technique and so forth. The kind of musical conversations you have with the musical figures of the dead, as well as the quick, those who have passed, as well as those who are alive. So yes, you have to have an understanding of the histories of different peoples, including Black peoples, but not just Black peoples. We're not the only folk who suffer. You know, you got Dalit peoples, you got Palestinian folk wrestling with Israeli occupation, you got Jewish folk wrestling with anti-Jewish treatments in the States, in Paris, in Russia. You got Roma people in Europe, so-called gypsies. I mean, there's so many different folks, peasants all around the world. All of these are rich traditions of people in the face of unbelievable catastrophe. And so I do believe that, you know, we Black folk have something distinctive, but it's something distinctive over against other people's something distinctive too. That's why we must have solidarity at the most profound human level of oppressed peoples, of struggling peoples.
Right. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. The more we see in each other, the things that we share, right, the less we're going to be comfortable with erecting rigid boundaries.
Absolutely.
That said, I, you know, just to get a little local about it, I would say that if whites and others are going to be playing and participating and profiting off of Black American music, they ought to know.
Oh, yeah.
And
isn't that the truth?
Because there's such a history of exploitation in so many ways that one of the only ways to work around that is to have the musicians know. But I would argue many of these musicians do know the tradition. They may not know the history of the people behind those traditions as much, but I would say that might need to be a little bit of education going on there. But you know, I'm kind of local about that.
No, that's real. That's very, very real, my dear sister. Absolutely.
All right, let's see what we got here. I think we got a lot of good questions. You know, people are so engaged. It's very much a blessing here.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so here's someone thanking us for doing this, and we're happy to do this, of course. And this is a person saying that they're from a blue-collar rural community, and they find themselves clashing with the spiritual and intellectual death among his peers. Do you ever feel isolated in your struggle for justice? And if so, how do you stay inspired? Cornel?
Should I jump in on that one, though? Yes,
indeed. It sounds
indeed.
like it was written just for you. I mean, I'll say what I got to say later, but...
No, I think that a certain kind of loneliness is always built into people who are willing to try to tell the truth and seek justice in a world that is so cold and cruel, and so many people are distracted. See, so many people are attending not to truth and justice, but to superficial things, the status, and it gets tied to envy and resentment and so forth. So there's always a certain kind of loneliness built in, but you have to use everything available to you, just like the musicians, especially the great Black musicians. You use everything available to you to transmute and transfigure and transform it into something that can be of use to others, that can be empowering to others, that can be enhancing to others. So you got to use your loneliness. There's nothing wrong with being lonely. You just don't want to get pushed to the edge or suicidal, but you just use your loneliness. The despair. I carry despair with me every day not at the core of my soul, but right within my soul. But Goethe says, he or she who has never despaired has never lived. Anybody who's despairing is a sign that they're sensitive, they're not numb. So you take that despair and you use it in such a way, the way Billie Holiday uses her Despairing Strange Fruit, written by the Jewish brother Maripol. Look how she uses that despair. Mm-hmm. My God. And it touches us at the deepest level. Or Coltrane's Alabama, he's using that despair. But we can get into Shakespeare, of course, the greatest literary figure of them all, Anton Chekhov himself. Every short story, wrestling with despair. So that the loneliness, yes, but you use it in such a way that it pushes you to solidarity with others. It pushes you to be more critical. But most importantly, it pushes you to be more courageous and compassionate rather than cowardly and conformist. That's the crucial thing.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, and that conformity can get you a lot of company, right? And
ooh, that's true.
And so your goal,
that's true. That's the truth.
You don't want your goal to just be having good company, because that's really where you're going to find the most people. So it's an interesting tension to think about how we might, want to be a part of something, right? And that the loneliness comes from feeling like we're missing out on that kind of mainstream connection. So it is about deciding that those kinds of connections are really about stoking losses for people, right? Harming people. Once you have that kind of empathy and compassion in that direction, then you're more likely to see the downside of that kind of connection, right?
That's so true.
Immediate connection.
And we remember what that genius from Vallejo said, Sly Stone. He says, stand, there's a midget standing tall and a giant beside him about to fall. Stand, there's a cross for you to bear, things to go through if you going anywhere. Right? He's coming right out of the black church. Mm-hmm. If you follow me, you will deny yourself and pick up your cross and bear witness to a love that renders you in the world, but not of the world. We used to sing that song in Shiloh Baptist Church. Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. Now, Brother Martin used to say what? He used to say, the cross is where you end up usually when you love the people who themselves are being hated. When he got out of that car after 4.5 hours driving from Atlanta to Reed's prison with a German Shepherd in the paddy wagon in the dark, just with Martin by himself. When he got out of that paddy wagon, old man King told me, his father, Daddy King, told me Martin could hardly walk. But what did he say? He said, this is the cross we must bear for the freedom of our people. You see, that's that using that loneliness. He was lonely in that paddy wagon. He was lonely when that German Shepherd kept barking and acting as if he was going to bite him. And when he got out, he was weak and tired and fatigued. We're supposed to be weak and tired when you push so far, but you got bounced back, you see. Whatever you have, your despair, your despondency, but use it in such a way that in the end, it becomes a source of giving to other people.
It's also important to think about how to use these experiences wherever we are. One of the things we think is we have to be as heroic in the same way as somebody else. Like, we're not going to be
That's right.
Martin King. I'm not
right.
going to be. I know.
None of us now. None of us.
Right. So, but sometimes people are discouraged by that. And one of the last question I was going to go to really segues from your point very well, which is how do we utilize this spotlight to create systemic change? And so we're always looking to be the leader of that change. And I would just encourage everybody to take what you just said, to heart, which is to dig deep where we are with our own experiences, with our own talents, gifts, and opportunities, and place those into service for the community as a whole, right?
Absolutely.
That's really the only way, because it's such a long distance run, isn't it? I mean,
Lord, yes.
This is not a short.
It's not a sprint. Not a sprint. But then Fannie Lou Hamer, another great musician and freedom fighter, used to sing that song, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Because she knew that everybody was a star, but it was a star inside. It wasn't the spotlights that the establishment was putting on you to see whether you are a leader or not. You allowing your light to shine by the love inside of you that pushes you to be a truth teller and a justice seeker, and being willing to live for something bigger than you, something called justice, something called equality, something called democracy. Or if you're religious, it can be God, it could be Allah, something that's bigger than you, luring you so that you're able to give the best of you in the short time that you have before the worms get your body.
Yes, indeed. And that time's getting shorter and shorter, isn't it?
Oh, isn't that the truth? That's the truth.
But that, Cornel, that was a perfect way to end. I can't believe it's, actually time for us to sign out. It's been such a joy. It will always be.
What a joy. What a joy.
Great memory for me here. So I want to just say to all the people who joined us today, thank you so much for being a part of this. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can hear about next episodes. And please join us the next time on The Tightrope. We'll see you then. Bye-bye now.
Lately, I've been feeling less crazy, trusting more who made me, pulling triggers with no safety on. Now I'm shooting my shots, getting my reps in. Used to staying home, but now I'm feeling arrested. Hectic times and I'm just getting more restless, thinking I should find a new perspective on life, on God. I took my strikes, 1, 2, 3, now I'm out of here. Now I'm rushing them out, they keep pitching at my ear. Tommy John flows, might be in some careers. I know change might come with some tears. I know the pain might last for some years. Pain and change, they both one and the same. But if you're trying to be the GOAT, you gotta sacrifice some lanes. First class flights, I've been flying on different planes. Finding my way, I've been hopping on different trains. I have my ways, now I'm open to what they were saying. I need some new plans, I need some helping hands. I need some real good people to help me understand. If I'm sinking in quicksand, that I'm not alone. I got a phone, need to pick it up. Old habits, gotta switch it up. Ego, gotta give it up. Now I'm moving on, got a life of my own. Making decisions whether I'm right or I'm wrong. Gotta make sense to me, the end's gotta begin. I've been going through changes, 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 changes. Oh,
Hello, everyone in our Tightrope family. We have a major announcement to make. After 1 full year of remarkable, soul-stirring conversations, we've come to the end of The Tightrope. On Thursday, September 9th of this year, we will release our final episode of the Tightrope podcast. Also, be sure to stay on the Tightrope with us until September 9th, as we still have a few powerful weekly episodes in the queue for you. In the final episode, Cornel and I will reflect on what a joy this journey has been, and we'll also highlight for you the reasons that we've decided to wrap the program. To each and every one of you that's watched, listened, subscribed, donated, shared with others, and expressed your love to us, we thank you eternally for the support.